Hello again. I spoke a while ago about teaching one's own children at home without sending them to school. It's certainly legal to do this, but on the other hand, it requires a huge amount of effort on the part of the parents. The first thing to realise is that there is absolutely no help at all available from the state. If you opt out of state education in Britain, that's it. You really are on your own. There's no tax breaks, no question of your child being able to sit examinations for free, no money, no resources, nothing at all. On the face of it, to some home educating parents this seems a little unfair, but a moment's thought will show you that it's not. I pay taxes which are used to fund schools, street lights, the army, police, fire brigade, all sorts of things. Just because I don't use one of those services, I can't really expect a refund for it. I haven't had occasion to call the police over the last few years, but I can't reasonably expect to have that portion of my taxes refunded, which is what some home educating parents seem to expect. They feel that because they don't send their child to school, they should get the money from the government that the government would give their child if he were at school. But I'm afraid it doesn't really work like that. You can teach your child at school, but then you're just really left to get on with it. Having decided to go it alone, how on earth is the average parent expected to teach all those specialist subjects which a school covers? And I've had this question asked many times. How is it possible to teach chemistry and physics and history, all those things, metalwork? It's not really that daunting a prospect. It's not as though, people don't seem to realise that teachers don't actually know all the things that they're teaching. If you speak to the average history teacher and start asking him about the provisions of the Bill of Rights or the Glorious Revolution in the late 17th century, he probably won't be able to tell you offhand about it. And the reason is that he'll only look these things up before he teaches a lesson. It's the same thing with science teachers. If you ask them the equations for photosynthesis while you're just chatting to them, they're almost certain you won't be able to tell you. When they're going to cover the subject with children, they get all the appropriate handouts and check up in the books and so on. They gen up on it beforehand, and that's the way it works. History teachers that are going to teach the First World War do the same thing. They read up on the First World War, they know the syllabus is fairly clear on what they have to cover. In other words, there's nothing that teachers are doing that parents can't do. If you want to teach your child about the First World War, there's nothing to stop you getting books from the library, learning about it for yourself, and then regurgitating it to your child the following day. It's what I did. It worked well enough. Parents can do this. I know this for a fact because I'm not a particularly scientifically minded person. It's not really where my interests lay. But my daughter took GCSEs in physics, chemistry and biology. She got A stars for all of them. Something else that people ask me is, what about all those laboratories and the special equipment such as test tubes and Bunsen burners? Surely you can't expect to reproduce all that in the home. As a matter of fact, something which a lot of parents don't realise, parents with children at school, there's very little that goes on like that these days. People have got hazy recollections of their own childhood and holding test tubes over flames. That would be an absolute bloody nightmare these days. The risk assessments alone would make that practically impossible. Rather than getting kids to do experiments these days, the teacher just shows them a YouTube demonstration. They watch that, so they don't actually do anything themselves. And this is where home education can really come into its own, because parents are not constrained by health and safety and don't have to fill out forms for everything they want to do, every expedition. Take biology, for example. The specifications for all the GCSEs that your child might take as a teenager are available online. In other words, you can see precisely what knowledge is necessary for the child to have. So if you want your child to get a top grade, the child has to know all the information and specification. But it's very detailed, so you can look through it, you can see at a glance, say in biology, that your child must understand and be able to explain the carbon cycle. They must know about the food chain. They've got to know about mammalian dentition. Mammalian dentition just means the sort of teeth that mammals have. I mean, that's a good way to start, because this is where you really do get the edge on schools. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a dead squirrel in the roadkill. They probably have, and most people probably just leave it where it is. But of course, what you can do is pick up that dead squirrel if you've got a child, bring it home, chop off the head, and then put the head into your compost heap in the garden. This is absolutely great, because after a while you'll have a skull with the teeth visible, which is one really good way of showing mammalian dentition to a child. You can also dig it up while it's decomposing and watch some maggots eating it. And that way you can start thinking about the food chain in action. Seeing the maggots eating the flesh and the hair will enable you to talk about insects. You can explain that frogs and hedgehogs feed on the insects, and then other animals like foxes will come along and eat the frogs. And that's it. You're covering the food chain. You've also got the carbon cycle there via the respiration of the insects. So rather than just looking at this on a YouTube video, you can see it in real life. Your child can actually watch what's going on, can actually explore the world. All children love skulls and looking at yucky things. So, for example, here's a good case of mammalian dentition. This is a skull that we decomposed. Yeah, it's a sheep's skull. I chopped that off. You can see the teeth. You know, this is mammalian dentition in action. That's one skull. There's a human skull as well. That's always popular with children. I used to bring home all sorts of dead things, ranging from squirrels and birds, a mouse. The biggest thing I brought home was a dead fox that had been run over by a car. I dragged that home and then chopped off its head with the garden spade and buried that in the compost heap. You can imagine how enchanted my wife was when I forgot about the headless fox and she encountered it at the end of the garden one day. That needed a bit of explanation. There was a notorious occasion when we found a dead seal on the beach and she refused point blank to bring it home in the car. That's still something of a grudge between us. Younger children, before they start studying for GCSEs, can be taken on a walk around a ploughed field. That only costs, where I live, you can walk to the fields, but even in the city, it's only the cost of a bus ride to get to a farm or something. Walking around a ploughed field is a fascinating experience for a child of 8 or so, because the number of things that they can find is absolutely incredible. Here's a couple of things we found. That's a fossilised sea urchin that we found in the local field. That covers things like evolution and prehistoric past. These are clay pipes. Oh look, it ties in with history. There's all sorts of things, other fossils that you can pick up in a field. History can be covered out of doors as well a lot of the time. If you're studying the Romans, even in London, there's fascinating sites. Most children are intrigued to go underground. In London, there's an underground Roman amphitheatre, an underground temple, an underground Roman fort, along with massive architectural remains, huge towering Roman walls in London that hardly anybody ever seems to notice these days. The same thing applies to the Normans, of course. There's no end of Norman remains, Norman churches, the Tower of London, the Norman Castle. It's not difficult to teach history out of doors most of the time. I believe that any person of average intelligence can perfectly capable of educating his or her child up to GCSE standard in any subject at all. Some people have noticed guitar in the background here. My wife plays, I don't. She didn't want to teach our daughter the guitar, so I undertook it. And I literally can't play a single note of the guitar, but I managed to get her through grade 5 at classical guitar. I would have been just as happy to teach her the harp or the church organ, quite honestly. All these things can be done. The main question is not whether it's possible to educate your child. The problem is often a financial one. My wife and I both worked part-time, which meant that one of us was always free to be with her. It meant that we didn't have money for expensive holidays. We didn't need any holidays at all, except occasional bit of time by the seaside. We didn't have much money for clothes either, but there you are. Books are freely available from your local library. You can buy books cheap enough from charity shops, and needless to say, the internet has a lot of information as well. I cannot end without an anecdote which sheds light on my own attitude towards schools. When she was 16, both my daughter and I felt that the enterprise had reached a natural conclusion. We'd probably seen enough of each other over the course of the 16 years and both needed a bit of a break. So she went to a further education college to study for A-levels, take them. She was absolutely astounded when she got to know some of the girls there. They'd all been at school. They'd all spent at least a decade previously at school. And apparently for the girls to whom she spoke, the most exciting thing about college was that they no longer had to seek permission to urinate. She found this utterly bizarre, and it prompted me to reflect in this way. Along with the requirement to address teachers as sir and miss, this need to request permission to void one's bladder, which is really an extraordinary state of affairs, puts schools into a very strange category. The only places in modern Britain where you need to ask permission to use the lavatory and also have to address superiors as sir are prisons, schools and the army. I find this rather a sobering thought, but I'll make no further comment on the matter.